ready to retire. So that's about a year and a half ago. So prior to that time, the information was really kept to a very close circle. We felt within my family, and I felt as the rabbi of the congregation, that it was important to keep it as family information only. So it was only my immediate family, my sons and their wives, my brother, and my in-laws. So we felt that was an important decision. When I decided to retire, we told the whole story of the cancer as well as the retirement. And it was, honestly, it was a bit of a shock to the congregational system, to the congregants who did not know what had gone on, but completely understandable from their point of view that I had to focus on my own health. And as one person said, you spent 40 years carrying everybody else on your back, time for you to take care of yourself. And that's what I've tried to do during this period of time.
Do you think people felt bad that they didn't know?
I think there were a few people who may have been surprised that I kept it private. That even was within my own family. But I don't think anyone objected to the reasoning behind it. I think people understand people make their own private and personal decisions. And that's part of our healthcare right, is to decide for ourselves what we want to do. And I felt very comfortable with my decision. I really never look back on it. I will also say that once I decided to send a letter to the congregation and to explain what was going on, it was in some ways liberating, because I realized at that point my children had the opportunity to tell their friends. And my wife had a chance to explain this to other people. And so it wasn't just a closed system anymore. We had the chance to explain to others. And that brings in support and help and care, which are all important to the healing process.
I've often thought, and I especially would appreciate your advice and counsel, that there's a certain amount of, a burden carrying a secret and not being able to share it like you described. And Judaism, of course, would publicize this to the community. I don't always think that's the wisest course of action, but I think the tradition says this is like something that the community has to carry. So I'm wondering if you could respond to that.
Sure. Well, in between the realization that I had cancer and the public announcement, there was a period of time where the community knew everything that was going on, because I had emergency back surgery. And at that point, I had to withdraw from my public presence at the synagogue, and everyone knew exactly what was going on. They knew that my wife was taking care of me at the hospital, that my kids were being taken care of and shepherded by the Cantor, her family, and by others within the community. And then all of a sudden, once I was feeling better, I'd show up at temple, and I'm wearing this gigantic brace around my torso. And
it's hard to keep that a secret.
It's hard to hide that one. So people did know, and they were very friendly. They were very supportive. They're very understanding. And so for some people, it wasn't hard for them to connect the dots from back surgery to the realization I had cancer. There had been some time in between. It was about a year apart from the surgery to the announcement. And so people had been in a mode of understanding that it's really okay to drop the rabbi off a lasagna. Thank you very much. And people from time to time still will make sure that they'll check in on me, or they'll include my name in the congregational Misha Berach. That's very, very nice, and that's positive support that's very appreciated.
Yeah, I think, part of the struggle of being a rabbi is, of course, your private life is very public. I mean, there's not an occasion in our lives that we don't share with our congregations, and yet health and illness is something that's I think very private. I mean, you don't want to share all your pains and all your difficulties and every doctor visit and so forth. So I think that's a really hard. It's a very difficult balance, and not just for rabbis, I think for everyone.
It is a very difficult balance. And for me, I didn't feel like I wanted to have my wife or my kids pumped for information about me. That's a very uncomfortable thing. So we could talk about it around the table. My kids knew that my two daughters who live at home with us knew that their older brothers knew about it, so they could talk with them, one of whom is a physician. They could certainly talk with mom about all kinds of things that were going on. But I didn't want them to feel that they were a target in any way, find out what's really happening with the rabbi. And as we know in congregations, there are places where a gossip can occur and where stories are told and information about the rabbi becomes a rampant point of discussion. And I didn't want any of that. So was it hard on them? I'm sure it was very difficult to hold the secret. But if the other choice was having everybody know and everybody, giving me a pity party, that was not part of what I wanted to do.
I think when we're trying to help and support friends, it's that balance between not delving into the nitty gritty and being supportive, but there's that human tendency to want to know every detail and to sort of
correct.
And we almost have to sort of check ourselves when we're in the role of being a supporter and being a friend. Like, you tell me what you want to tell me, and we can be there to be supportive. So, you and I have been talking over the course of last months and years. Is there advice you could you're now in the other chair in a sense? Is there things that are that are really helpful to hear from friends, and things that aren't helpful or even hurtful?
Yeah. I fortunately haven't had hurtful comments. I've had maybe some people who were inquiring a little bit more than I would be comfortable, but I'm a big boy to be able to say, that's let's talk about something else.
Yeah.
People's helping comments sometimes are just a little text that says checking in, how you doing, is a wonderful thing, because you don't feel forgotten. Part of illness is the isolation of it all. So by being able to just have that little bit is good. And my favorite expression for all that goes on, especially as someone who's dealing with illness and with this disease, is an Arabic expression. It's yom asal, yom basal. One day honey, one day onions. And I hope people read me on the honey
Arabic?
days. What? Yeah, why not? It's a great expression.
It's a great expression.
So there are days that sometimes are just not good. There may be issues internally, or I have a headache, or I am exhausted, or I did not sleep well from my medication. And those days aren't easy. And so on those days when I happen to get a phone call from a friend, how are you? How are you doing today? That's very sweet. Or a little text, a little email, someone sending me those terribly long cartoons that are like 15 cartoons that you get from somebody, all on the subject of the pandemic or the election or whatever it may be. But they mean that the other person on the other end is thinking of you, and that's very appreciated.
Do you think? Yeah, I would imagine, just knowing that someone's thinking about you, do you sometimes feel pressure to sort of alleviate their concern? I'm doing okay. Or do you feel like there's friends that you can just really unload to? I mean,
I have people I can unload to without any difficulty whatsoever. Some are colleagues, some are very old friends. With congregants, I have to decide with whom can I share this information, where's it going to end up? And I don't want to feel that I'm going to become a super spreader of my own gossip. And so I try to be a little bit careful. On the other hand, people who have concerns are genuine in wanting to know how I am. And that's often done in a very kind manner and very deeply appreciated.
I think that sometimes people want their rabbis to be without struggle. And
oh, absolutely. They want us to. We don't have struggle. We don't have difficulty. We're perfect. We never make a mistake. We never say a wrong thing. We are, in fact, the closest that they know to angels. But we're human beings, and we make our mistakes, and we have our foibles, and some days we just don't feel well, and we have our anger, and it's all part of being a human being. And we try to keep it in check so that we are better human beings, but we also recognize we have our faults, and we have to deal with that.
Yeah, but I would imagine sometimes there is some pressure to kind of to tell people what they want to hear.
Yes, there are those people that, oh, I'm doing fine, and they feel better.
Right.
And I still try to be as honest as can be. I don't need them to know what today's diagnosis was.
Right.
But I think that's the same thing. If you broke your leg, or if you had recent heart surgery, even if it may have been elective, the difference is that cancer has such a big C with it. There's such a fear of cancer. You're going to catch it, and people understand cancer mostly. I think people understand through the lens of breast cancer that women have. So people were asking me, "Oh, I'm amazed you still have your hair." Well, my particular variety, multiple myeloma, hair doesn't fall out with its medications. There are different medications and different ways to treat it. It does have other impacts on the system. But I think today people who have experienced cancer within their extended family are much more able to ask and to talk about this than people who really don't have an experience with illness, especially with cancer. I think it's harder for people that don't know because they just haven't been there, haven't had that experience, for which they're really quite lucky, because this random, how you catch cancer or how it's discovered is quite random.
Look, I mean, I'm thankful that you're doing so well, and that you're managing and living with this. I imagine that's the only way to put it. But you are acknowledging there's tremendous fear about the word cancer. Tremendous.
Sure.
And it's also
absolutely
so varied. And so I would, as a rabbi, part of our job is to allay fear. And so that must be very tricky when you're sort of in the seat of needing to receive of some of this love and concern. So that's to not create more fear, because I know you feel a tremendous responsibility as a rabbi always. So that must sort of twist you up in knots at times, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would say most of my fears were really personal and family oriented. I was not worried during, for example, after my back surgery, Shabbat was going to be held at University Synagogue, even in my absence. And people were going to be able to answer the telephone, and pastoral calls, even a wedding. It was going to be performed by others, my colleagues. And I just knew that was good. I have a wonderful team of people with whom I worked, and I knew that was going to be covered. I think the fear was more how I was bringing it home. When I went into rehab after being 10 days in a hospital and then going to a rehab hospital, the first question the physical therapist in charge asked me was, "What's your goal?" And I was like, "What do you mean my goal?" I said, I want to be home by Shabbat. That's in 4 days. Get me home. This was early Monday morning. I said, get me home by Friday night. And I was very lucky. I was able to walk in the door Friday night accompanied by my daughters. And the fear I had that I was going to be hospitalized for longer was probably one of the deepest fears that I had. I was not happy being in a hospital.
I would imagine.
And the rehab hospital itself had services till about 5 o'clock. And then it was just nothing the rest of the night. No, I'm very lucky. I had my family visiting. I had relatives from out of town. My son flew in from out of town. These were things that were very meaningful to keep me occupied. But a single person, no family, 5 o'clock in the evening till 8 o'clock when treatment might start in the morning, those are very long, lonely hours. So I did not like being overnight in a hospital by myself. And I was fortunate to be discharged early. But that was really a significant fear. And the long-term fear is, how long am I going to be around? And so that has some time to really look in the mirror and make every day count as best as it can.
So you're getting me emotional, Morley.
I understand it's an emotional subject.
So I think you and I talked about sort of how this has clarified some of your thinking about Judaism, and maybe you can conclude with, where do you think Judaism has lifted you? How has Judaism helped to lift you the most, if you will? And has there been anything in Jewish teachings that you have, really found not helpful, I guess would be the corollary?
Yeah, I've never been one to acknowledge that some parts of the Bible will be that God punishes the wicked and rewards the righteous. So that's a long-term theology of mine that isn't how the world works, and that God doesn't have Johnny lose the ball to run into the street, get hit by a car. That's part of God's plan. I don't believe any of that. I don't believe the theology that says Louisiana must be a horrible place because they've had 5 hurricanes in the last period of time. There must be a lot of evil people there. I don't buy any of that theology. So I didn't believe that I had done something wrong that would have brought this upon me. And certainly having gone through it, it re-clarified that which I believed was really proven by the test. Secondly, I find that I've always talked about people caring for one another as being God's agents in the world, messengers of God. And so that was certainly proven true by people who were being incredibly helpful in all kinds of ways, whether it was a meal at home or helping my daughters or whatever it may be. That certainly was of great value. I found more meaning in the Misha Berach, and singing it and being part of it than I had before. And it's interesting right now because since everything is virtual, when it comes to Misha Berach in our congregation on Shabbat Eve, people will list names in the chat.
Right.
And when I see my name on the screen, that people are remembering me, yeah, it's really very significant and very special. And I'm very touched that people will do that. Or I'd be in a congregational setting and I'd hear someone prior to the pandemic who say my name out loud. That was very touching for me. So that clarified it.
And that helps to hear your name said out loud is not going back to your earlier comment, it's not an invasion of privacy. It really helps to lift you.
It helps to lift me. And especially after I became public with all this, I don't feel forgotten. And when I can hear it, I know that people will be doing it even if I'm not there or I'm not on the virtual Shabbat that particular evening. So that becomes a very meaningful thing for me. I think it may be a tad embarrassing for my daughters, but hey, teenagers, right? That's what happens.
Yeah, they would be embarrassed by just about anything you did or any mention of your name. So, given their age, which does continue longer, I promise you. So, yeah.
My former assistant had a picture on Facebook. How wonderful it was that she has this granddaughter who's 2 years old, and she loved her, and this is kissing and beautiful. And I sent her a photograph of a T-shirt that said, "Grandchildren are the reward for not strangling your teenage children."
Very good. Look, Morley, I just want to thank you especially for coming on the show, but most especially, I mean, of course, for your friendship, which I'm always grateful for, but for
Thank you.
sharing something that's so deeply personal and something that's so private, because I do think it can help all of us, reaching out and helping to lift our friends who may have cancer or other illnesses. I think you touched on something that I do believe is also very important vis-a-vis the pandemic. The sense of loneliness is profound. And there are many people who are even more alone in the hospital because of the pandemic.
Correct.
And we have to figure out ways to kind of make sure that they don't feel that sense of loneliness.
Right. And the key way is to remember, if you have to think twice, should I call him or should I not call her? The answer is call. Doesn't have to be a long conversation. Leave a message, send a text, send an email. People like to be remembered, and it does cut the ice of the loneliness that people do feel.
That's great. I'm going to leave it with your closing advice. I think that's great advice for people to take. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's been a great morning being with you. Thank you.